Welcome back to the last Boxscore Geek episode of the year. We have Patrick back on with busyness and all that, so fantastic. We're not doing a solo geek show this week. And yeah, we have tons and tons to discuss because obviously it's the gift that keeps on giving. Josh Smith, after last week, we talked about him for like an hour, back in the news again with more to talk about. Somehow we managed to escape discussing Rajon Rondo's trade, basically because it happened right around the holidays and Josh Smith happened. And tomorrow you're going to get a special treat. Patrick is going to be going over his Vegas bets for the year. And so we'll be talking that a little bit of that at the end of the show. You get a sneak preview. So I'm Andres Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. Patrick Minton, the original NBA Geek, is on the show. You can find him as NBA Geek. And then, of course, we have the Word of God, Brian Foster. You can find as Boxscore Brian. Brian, actually, do you have your video of yourself again, Brian?
No, my camera's not set up this week, but I'm still really excited for this show, the year-end show. And as you mentioned in the show notes, it's a Texas-sized show. We've got all these Texas teams to talk about today.
Oh, God, I forgot I named it that. Jeez. In the email I sent out, I said a Texas-sized show about Texas. As a pun I made late at night, I apologize to everybody. All right, so Patrick, I'm going to let you chime in on the first topic. We're going to talk Rajon Rondo, who we didn't write a post about. I didn't talk about in 2 podcasts in a row, but we have to discuss. And, I think you actually mentioned him a little in your discussion of the Dallas Mavericks. What are your thoughts about this trade?
My thoughts are this makes a good team a great team, I think. Or at least, closer to great than to good. I mean, it seems like the classic thing to do or the classic type of general manager move you make. You've got a great player, and I'm talking about Brandon Wright right now, who's sitting behind 2 other players, and he's never going to really crack the rotation and play as much as those 2 players. And you have a position of need, desperate need. It just makes sense to trade that great player to fill that position of need. Theoretically, it's a win-win for both teams, although I honestly don't think the Celtics care at all about Brandon Wright, but they just wanted to kind of unload some salary and get something for Rondo rather than get nothing for Rondo. And it just seems like a no-brainer. I mean, a lot has been said about Rondo's limited shooting abilities, but at the end of the day, that isn't the type of point guard that this team needs. This is a team that just needs a point guard who will zip around and find open shooters at the 3-point line and throw alley-oops to guys that are really good at running at the rim to dunk, and that's exactly what this team needs. I think it's a perfect fit for them. Also gives them a little bit of defense and okay, you can argue about Rondo falling off the cliff a little defensively. It's an argument that I'd be happy to have with you because I'm not just going to let you win that argument, but there's no question that Rondo brings rebounding, which is something that this team kind of needs because, aside from Tyson Chandler, they just didn't have a lot of, and Brandon Wright, of course, who wasn't playing, they didn't have a lot of great rebounders on that team. So I think that, especially in the realm of defensive rebounding, you can usually make up for poor rebounding big men by having, a guard or 2 who's good at rebounding. We've seen that with lots of teams, like the Heat teams of years past, and and that, I mean, it just seems like a perfect thing for them. And I mean, it's not like this takes them from 50 wins to 60 wins, but I think it takes them from the 53 or 4 that they were probably going to win to like 56, 7, 8, which is pretty much exactly what you need in the West. That difference could be 2 or 3 spots because you're literally looking at a conference where the top 4 teams might be all like within 1 or 2 games of each other, and they might all have better records than any playoff team in the East.
Yeah, that's and 2 other things. Well, actually, like 4 things. So I'll definitely forget at least 2. That's my MO when I say multi-list things. But this smacks a lot of the Jason Kidd trade in so many ways. I mean, first off, remember when the Mavericks went and won a title last time, it was with, a pass first point guard paired with Tyson Chandler. Second off, something somebody pointed out to me about Brandon Wright versus Rajon Rondo is both of their contracts expire this year. So if the Mavericks want to grab Brandon Wright back up at the end of the season. It's entirely possible they could first spot.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but it's always been a mystery to me why anybody let them re-sign Brandon Wright for whatever 2 million or 3 million, whatever
I
they
think it
signed him
was
for in the
5,
first
but
place.
yeah, ridiculous.
I mean, why wasn't some other team grabbing him? I just don't understand. Like, he seems like he's not that old, because he came in after I think he came in after a one and done in Kansas, and even though he's a 5 or 6 year veteran, he's still not that old, and he just seems like the exact kind of guy where it's just like, man, if I could just get this guy more minutes, he's going to put up all-star numbers.
I mean, you named a lot of stuff, and you haven't done this in a while, but I always love like your names, like the what was it, the Ryan? Man, how am I dropping his last name? Because he has
The
dropped
Ryan
off
Anderson fallacy?
the Ryan Anderson fallacy. But like,
That's a
there is
contract
this,
fallacy, right?
there is a weird thing with like Kevin Love was an example of this, where like a player just doesn't get minutes, and so I think the start of his career was injury. It seemed pretty likely because he was a highly touted prospect, but it just seems like teams go, well, other teams didn't give him minutes, so we don't need to give him minutes.
Yeah, I feel like players' reputations and or history and or perception or hype, whatever you want to call it, it follows them around for a long time. And that has both positive and negative connotations for the player. For example, one player who's still enjoying the benefits of hype is Andrew Wiggins, right? I mean, he had amazing hype coming out of high school, and it's still the reason that he's getting all these minutes. I mean, you can argue all you want about his athleticism, and none of that's deniable, and his potential and all those things. But the pure fact of the matter is that there have been plenty of other players, like I'll name Gerald Green off the top of my head, who had similar athletic gifts, and they didn't get that same opportunity because they didn't have that same hype working for them. So they didn't get the opportunity to just play 30 minutes a game, no matter how terrible they were, right? Most of those players, they played terrible, coach yanked them. Played terrible, coach yanked them. And they never really got the opportunity to like just get 30 minutes a game in all the time, no matter what. And I think it'll remain to be seen whether that works out for anybody. But the reverse kind of happens. I mean, we see it with Jeremy Evans in Utah and Brandon Wright in Dallas and
Kenneth Faried still in Denver in spite of everything.
Well, I'm thinking of even like smaller player, Chris Anderson forever, his entire career, Ed Davis, his entire career. It's like they have a history of not playing very much. So he comes to a new team, and when the new coach gets him, he's like, oh, it's this guy who's never played that much, so he probably isn't that good, and so I'm not going to play him very much either. And it's just weird to me that nobody says, hey, let me think outside the box and let me play him 30 minutes a game and just see what happens. When you look at their per minute numbers, and it's one of those things that we stat geeks get lots of grief from other fans and saying, well, yeah, but per minute numbers don't mean much because if they played more minutes, their numbers wouldn't be the same. Except all the evidence points exactly the other way. All the evidence from the entire history of the NBA points that if you take a guy who plays 10 minutes a game and you play him 20 minutes a game, his per minute performance stays the same or even gets better. Like all the evidence from the history of the NBA says this.
Well, let's. I mean, but also, by the way, there's stuff you can point at, and this is one other thing to look at Brandon Wright versus Rajon Rondo is. This season, Brandon Wright's shooting is absurd. He's 70% true shooting. And while he is a really good shooter, I think it is fair for anybody to say regression to the mean there. Like nobody shoots 70% across a whole season. It's fair to say that.
But look at it doesn't matter how much he regressed. Look at his career numbers.
No, I agree. No, but what I'm saying is if you, like right now, if you look at the comparison, right, Brandon Wright is one of the best per minute players in the league right now. Yeah, he's up there with Anthony Davis. But I think it's fair to say, okay, well, he's really good, but he's not that good. And I think it's fair to actually look at Rajon Rondo's shooting numbers. Maybe it's hard because injury, right? And say he's not a great shooter, but he's not this bad, or at least so we hope. We'll see. But I mean, that right there is always interesting to me when you look at players and kind of reputation. One last note, I think I'll say on that with like Chris Anderson is like you have weird off the court stuff that impacts opinions of players that seems irrelevant, and it seems very hit and miss. Like, you'll let Michael Jordan, who was, nobody realizes, but in his prime, he was womanizing, he had gambling problems, he was a mean person to his teammates, let him off the hook. But then you look at one of his teammates, Dennis Rodman, exact same behavior, got him a very short leash. And when you said Chris Anderson, that's why he had lots of drug problems, and I think those definitely followed him around his whole career.
Sure, yeah, and I mean, he got a reputation for being, a role player who couldn't do anymore. And I mean, Miami was literally the first team that gave him, a bigger role, even though they aren't a huge role there, right?
Yeah, I mean, he got it a little in Denver, and then I think in Miami, because we talked to a few people there, and basically their comment was his knees were just done by then. So that was the problem, right? When he was in Denver with George Karl, is when he should have been getting 3 or 4 more minutes a night and helping us win 2 or 3 more games, which is an extra playoff.
Especially when you look back at how terrible the other big men were that George Karl played. I mean, Al Harrington was just ugh.
Yeah. Let's not go down that. Let's not.
I'm sorry, we didn't want to bring up traumatic memories for today.
All right,
but you're in Wisconsin now, so it's all good.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I go to Wisconsin. The Bucks start playing well. I get a little bit of hope, and then Jabari Parker goes down right out. I blame you, frankly.
Yeah.
You are. I think I'm going to have to start doing
statistics.
I'm going to have to start doing statistical analysis of you, because particularly like the Minnesota Timberwolves, we'll talk a little bit more of them. Every time you write a post about betting on a team and the reasons behind it, your reasons are 100% sound, and then that just means that team is going to get wiped with injury. So like the minute you gave the gold
over on anybody, right?
Yeah, the minute you gave the gold star to Jabari Parker, like that was just putting a hit out on the Bucks. It was like, no, we can't have nice things if Patrick likes them.
Come on, I put I got the money on Sacramento, and they look great. I mean, they look great to beat the over. Obviously, they don't look like a great team, but although I will give you you have a point there, because Boogie Cousins, like, viral meningitis. Who gets viral meningitis nowadays? It's like they were well on their way to playing 500 ball, but now they got to catch up a few games. But it's still a great bet. But yeah,
we don't talk a lot about hockey, but didn't Sid Crosby get like the mumps or something recently?
You know what? I don't follow hockey at all, so I have no comment.
All right, fair enough. Well, we'll move on there. But anyway, just
one from Minnesota who doesn't know anything about hockey.
Well, it's not a bad. Well, and then the last thing. So on the Rondo trade, I think we're in favor of it. I wanted a few more notes, which is the one advantage they have here is they basically were trading for the bird rights to a very good player, and they gave up a good player for that. But again, the bird rights to Brandon Wright don't matter unless you think he's going to get a major contract. In fact, like I said, the Mavericks are going to have tons of space next year to do whatever they want with. That's including Rajon Rondo. So having his bird rights means they're first in line for that. They gave up a player that was behind other players, like you mentioned. They already have Dirk Nowitzki and Tyson Chandler, so he was already off the bench. So I'm a fan of this move. I thought it was a good move. I didn't like seeing Wright go, but if that's what it took, and if they re-sign Wright, that'll just be a complete slap in the face.
It didn't work out for them, but the logic was the same as the Bledsoe trade from the Clippers. Again, it didn't really work out with them because for mystifying reasons, Jared Dudley couldn't do anything in Los Angeles. But really what they did, they were like, okay, Bledsoe's a great player, but how the hell does that help us? Because we got this guy named Chris Paul. Like, it just doesn't matter. I can't. I think, history is showing us is like that Bledsoe can probably play the 2-guard too. So like maybe they should have just slotted Bledsoe in the 2-guard and solved their.
But the other thing is they knew he wanted a pay raise, right? And that was the problem there.
Yeah, if you look at Bledsoe's production, they wouldn't have been upset about the pay raise. But I mean, it all boiled down to like, okay, he's great, but he's behind Chris Paul, so we're stuck, right? And we're not going to bench Chris Paul, so let's use him to get something in a position of need, which seemed to work out perfectly with Redick and Bledsoe, but. Redick and Dudley, but I'm still mystified at why Dudley didn't work out in LA. I mean, I think it was probably just variance, but could have been something else too. But it's the same logic, right? You got a guy who's great, but you can't get on the court because you have other players that need to be on the court that are just in the way, so to speak. It's like you can't make a team of 5 Tyson Chandlers. You can't make a team of 5 Chris Pauls. So if you have a couple extra, you should trade them away to get some LeBron Jameses on your team. Right?
And actually, that would be the last. So everybody, I wax effusive about Kenneth Faried at least twice a week, and everybody always comes back with what you just said. I hate you all. Every one of you that does this, you just drive me batty when you go, yeah, but you guys say that Kenneth Faried and Chris Humphries and Tyson Chandler are amazing. You couldn't just make a team of all them. And it's like, well, yeah, I wouldn't. Like if I was a GM, I would look for, I would make a complete team. But very few teams have that problem of having too many of those guys. And the other thing is, if you've got one of those guys, if you're going to trade them, you have to get good value back. And that's what I'll give the Mavericks for right. As you know, the Nuggets, I think, tried to trade away Kenneth Faried for Iman Shumpert, and it didn't go through because the Knicks didn't have a draft pick. That was the breaking point. They said, we're going to trade away this great player for an overrated guard and a draft pick. They said, we don't have a draft pick. They said, never mind. As opposed to the Mavericks who said, we have this really underrated big, but we're going to trade them away for a star guard. That's why we'll give. And by the way, that was the last note I made is this will move us into our next topic. I've really loved the Mark Cuban, Daryl Morey feud that's kind of been going on this year.
Oh, it's great, isn't it?
And yeah, and like the beginning of the year, Morey basically took a shot at Mark Cuban about how he's only good because of Dirk and he didn't get Dirk. Well, what I'll say is in the recent moves, the Mavericks getting Rajon Rondo versus the Rockets getting our next topic, Josh Smith, I got to give it to the Mavericks. And I have no idea what's
no-brainer.
I have no idea.
I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk about this now because you've been itching to get this out all week long. So you've got a poker metaphor for what Daryl Morey is doing with Josh Smith right now. Let's hear it.
Well, you got it too, by the way. What I loved is on Twitter a week ago, I said I have a poker metaphor if Josh Smith goes to Houston for next week's show. And I forget who. I'm not even going to give them the credit. I'm not even going to say their name on the air because I don't want to give them any press. They said, I disagree with your metaphor. And I went, I haven't made the metaphor. You can't. But obviously you got it, and we kicked it around back and forth on our internal forums. And the basic metaphor is when you look at poker players, and you and I both played a fair bit of poker, there's very sound play, right? Like they're like, I forget, better than me, like I think 10 to 20 hands that you should really only be playing pre-flop.
Oh, I get wild and crazy pre-flop, so I won't agree with that.
Okay, well, let's keep the metaphor simple because there's position and all that. But I'm saying let's just say middle, at a tight table, middle of the rotation. There are like 10 hands you should really be playing there, and.
Oh man, Jesus, I'm not that tight.
God, all right. I guess this is you and I are different. We'll have to see. We'll have to play poker at some point.
Let me try to roll with this metaphor. So here's the thing: is like, whenever I'm at a table, and full disclosure, I used to play poker for a living. Whenever I'm at a table and some guy, has a hand, and whenever some guy anywhere says, "Oh, I've got my favorite hand," I get all like, "Ooh," because I know that his favorite hand is some piece of shit hand, right? His favorite hand is never a good hand because people who say, "Oh, I've got my favorite hand," they always have some crap like Jack-7 of spades. Or something that's just a terrible hand in poker. And it's not that you can't win with terrible hands. It's just that you have to know how to play them and you have to know how to use them. You can't just fall in love with them and say, oh, it's my favorite hand, so no matter what, we're going to town with this. So it seems like Josh Smith is Daryl Morey's Jack-8 of hearts. He's like, well, I know this isn't a very good hand, but I'm sure I can make it a winner. If I can just get the Jack-8 of hearts to move the 8, a little bit closer to the Jack. If I can just get that fucking 8 of hearts to behave like the Jack of spades, then I'll have Jack.
Well, what you go like in that scenario, right? You're like, if I can get the 7, 9, 10, this is the perfect hand. It's a deceptive hand. And that was my metaphor is that you have poker players and there's very sound play. Like I think your response when we were talking about it on the forum was, well, my favorite, ace seems to win pretty well too, and no one says that's their favorite hand.
My favorite hand is aces.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
But so with that, right, what you've got is people really seem to like in poker winning with subpar hands, and it's because they get this rise out of being able to say to people, see, I beat you with Jack-8. I didn't need aces. I beat you with Jack-8. They get a pride thing. And sports to me seems like that so often, and it's annoying where it's like, you couldn't get Josh Smith to work, but I can get Josh Smith to work. Instead of just going like the Mavericks going, yeah, Rondo's really good and he doesn't want to play for you. We're going to take it.
Yeah. To circle back to the poker metaphor, it's like, don't get me wrong. I love, like, there's nothing I love more than you have like 2 5 of hearts and you flop a flush and you make a huge hand and somebody calls you all the way down and then you flip over a crazy flush and everybody at the table's like, oh, you fucking scrub, I can't believe you played that hand, and then you're scooping $600 or whatever. I love that stuff. No, don't get me wrong, but the thing is like I'm well aware of how it changes my image. And okay, now that I've played 2-5 of hearts, people are like looking at me differently and playing differently against me. I'm also well aware of like it's pre-flop and I've raised and some other dude is re-raised and then some other dude is re-raised and it's like I probably can't bluff anybody here, so I should just let it go because I'm not gonna flop a flush again, right? And it just feels like so okay, let's talk about the risk thing again, because when you talk poker analogies, you're talking about a small risk to win a big pot because I have a crappy hand, but if I can get in for a very small amount of money and I can play a big pot and I can flop some miracle hand that nobody thinks I have or nobody would ever suspect me of having, I can win a huge pot. The thing is, though, like the Josh Smith signing isn't so risk free because anyone who's paying any attention here should know that the risk is not the money. The risk is that you had a championship contending team and you've now fucked it up by putting in Josh Smith in your roster, and that's going to cost you way more than the $2 million you're going to pay Josh Smith. And then let's tack on top of that fact that you had to let Tariq Black go, who was like
That
your. I mean,
that by the
he
way,
was
right
like
there.
Tariq Black was your Jack-8 of hearts. He was this guy that nobody wanted, and you picked him out of the D League or wherever the hell he was, and you said, I'm going to give this guy a shot, and he was playing great basketball. I mean, he was not world earth-shattering, but he's like 23 years old, and he's rebounding like a machine, and he's shooting good shots, and it's like he's good, and the odds are he's going to get better. And why would you let him go? Because you're paying him like $4 a season or something. It doesn't make any sense. And that's a huge risk to let a guy like that go and to put a guy in your roster who has a long history of playing terrible basketball and getting paid for it. So we'll talk about behavioral conditioning in a second too. Why would you think that's risk-free? That's not risk-free. You're taking a huge risk.
Well, what I loved on last week's show, the end of last week's show, I basically said, I was like, well, because Brian asked about risk too. I said, well, the thing is, you're right. Like the risk isn't really like the cost, right? Because they got Josh Smith for nothing. I was like, the risk is, you could instead be looking for an underrated, undrafted prospect that you can sign cheaply and develop and then use. And what I loved about the Rockets is they let that guy go. Like I've never had a case where I disagree with the move and I lay out my reasoning and then a team just does exactly that. Now, by the way, that said, before we talk anything else about this trade or waiver, I keep calling things
Acquisition.
trade when acquisition is. This is a lose-lose scenario for us stats geeks. It doesn't matter how this plays out. No one will give us any credit. Because if Josh Smith does turn it around, I was watching with bated breath. We're going to talk about this a little more in a second. If Josh Smith does turn into a good player and they do go far in the playoffs, people will say, what a brilliant pickup by Daryl Morey. If Daryl Morey, on the other hand, gets Josh Smith and Josh Smith plays terribly, people will say, well, he had to do something. He was in a really tough West. He didn't have what it takes to get over the hump in the playoffs, so he needed to do something. It's why people, after the fact, this still drives me nuts, the Phoenix Suns, when they traded for Shaquille O'Neal, the fact that that is not remembered as one of the worst trades in the history of the NBA, is annoying. And the reason people say that is because, the previous year, the Phoenix Suns got bounced, I think, in the second round because of some unlucky seeding, and people said they had to do something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, I mean, it's very well possible that the Rockets were well on their. I mean, it looked like it. When you look at the numbers, they were well on their way to a top 4 seed. So playing Josh Smith gives you the potential to screw that up. And that's a big problem, right? You didn't actually have to do something. You might have been well on the way to your 4th seed. And there's, I know that your power forward position is this kind of like sort of weak spot in your roster. And you feel like you have to address that. And that's all well and good, but every position can't be perfect. And to put a player in that despite all of his physical talents, a player that has very real, very bad flaws, and insert him into that system, it's just terrible, right? I mean, the Rockets are who they are because they have Dwight Howard and James Harden and surround them by players like Trevor Ariza who fit perfectly into the system. I can't think of a better pickup for that system than Trevor Ariza. They took a guy who's really good at defense and really good at threes, and they said, look, Ariza, what we want you to do is fucking play defense and shoot threes. And he must have just been like, oh yeah, boy, this is perfect for me, right? I mean, and then they get a guy who doesn't do any of that, who actually totally does all the opposite things of what they want to do offensively. And that's supposed to magically work out and make them better. Like it might, but it was not a good risk.
Well, even on that, that's what I loved. That first game, thank you, Josh Smith, for the Christmas gift. I didn't get you anything, but I actually wrote a Quora answer. I think about Josh. I think I wrote a Quora answer about Josh Smith, and basically what I said is the following. I said, well, first off, he does have some good skills that basically involve not offense, right? He don't let him shoot. He should be taking 0 shots a game, but he is actually decent at rebounding, pretty good at assists. He's got some stuff he's good at, and I'm sure that's what the Rockets, front office said is they go, if we can just get him to stop doing these bad things and just do these good things, he'll be a great player. It's the common argument everybody uses for every player, right? If Kobe Bryant could just stop taking those, contested long range twos, he'd be the best ever. It's like, well, yeah, but he does. So that was their thinking. The other line of thought was that I think it's Mata Yunus. He's just not very good. So I said, okay, Josh Smith has a little upside. Mata Yunus is hurting him, so he's probably not going to hurt him too much, and it could work out if he just plays smart and doesn't shoot. And in game 1, he came off the bench, and at the end of the first half, he had taken 10 shots, which was the most on the Rockets. And at the end of the game, he had taken 21 shots, which was the most on the Rockets, and he had shot horrendously. So this means Josh Smith came into the Rockets, which has Dwight Howard, James Harden, some great three-point shooters, took more shots than them, was doing horribly, and kept shooting. And of course, the annoying part, there's 2 annoying parts to that story, by the way, Patrick, because we're going to talk a little bit more about this. But Josh Smith actually had a decent game that game because he did some other stuff. And they ended up winning the game. So those 2 things kind of make it not as funny. But
as I said on Twitter, they won that game, but sure. But Dwight Howard had 4 shots in regulation, I think. It was 4 shots.
Yeah.
If you give Dwight Howard 21 shots in regulation, if you find a way to get Dwight Howard 21 shots in regulation, that game does not go to overtime, and you win 15 in overtime, and everyone goes to the shower early, and everyone's happier, and all your superstars get a little more rest, and your team is better. It's just, it doesn't matter that you won that game. It was still terrible. And then to tag onto this, sorry, not to tag. So let's talk about Josh Smith shooting lots of shots. And what you were talking about is like, if I could only get Josh Smith to not shoot outside of the zone, outside of the lane, he'd be a great player. Which, frankly, the league is full of guys like that who already do that. Let's take, for example, Brandon Wright. You got guys who already know how to be efficient. But here's the thing, and let's give Josh Smith some credit here, is Josh Smith got paid a lot of money for shooting terribly. This is his entire career is like this. Since day 1 in Atlanta, he's chucked a lot of shots, and since day 1, everyone everywhere in the NBA has said, well, if he would just stop shooting bad shot X, you'd be great. But Josh Smith knows all that anyone's going to pay attention to when it comes time to give me a contract is the points per game column. And so even if I'm bad at these shots, if I just chuck up enough of them, my points per game are going to look great, and people are going to talk about my talent, and they're going to give me money anyway. And that's exactly what happened. And now, so Detroit gave him $14 million a year or whatever, despite the fact that he in Atlanta was already bad at shooting too many contested long twos and not very good at threes. And despite all of that, Atlanta gave him $14 million a year. This is Dumar's last Hail Mary attempt, right? Okay, so he's so bad in Detroit that they actually waive him and decide we're going to pay you, $28 million over the next 2 years to not play for us. That's how bad he is. And then someone else gave him $2 million.
Did they pay $2 million?
So he was waived, and he cleared waivers because nobody wanted that crazy contract. But then the Houston Rockets are giving him $2 million more to play. So even though he was so bad, he's actually earning $16 million this year instead of 14 because he got waived by his team, which freed him up to get another contract. And they even gave him more than the vet minimum. So if I'm Josh Smith, I'm sitting here thinking like, why should I stop shooting? Because it's getting me paid.
And in fact,
There's no reason for me to stop shooting.
it's the last year of his deal, right? He's got a 1 year deal. So what he knows, and I think Dave Barry's brought this up before about the Clippers. I think Dunleavy had a year where he had a really bad team, and he said, my players are taking bad shots and I'm telling them to stop and they won't listen to me. And the reason they weren't listening to them is that they were all on contract years. And they go, look, if my points per game takes a dip, no one's going to sign me. And we're not going to the playoffs. So why would I listen to you? Why would I stop shooting? So Josh Smith is kind of in the same boat. He knows if he goes far in the playoffs and scores 15 points a game, next season somebody's going to say he's the missing piece to be a contender.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, even if he's not very efficient and he gets like 7 or 8 million a year next year. Like I mean, I don't know why anyone would think Josh Smith would stop shooting, because that's not how behavioral conditioning works. That's not how any of this works, to quote a very popular.
Why don't you wrap that up? Because you said like that, you perked my ears where you were talking like behavior. So I'd be curious if you want to wrap that up, and then we'll go on to your picks for next year.
I mean, it's simple behavioral conditioning. You do a thing, you get rewarded for the thing, you keep doing that thing. And one of the interesting things about behavioral conditioning is that it's even if you want to, it's very hard to stop doing the things that you've been conditioned to do. And the perfect evidence of this is what I always bring up to the non-believers, is just what happened the last time you stuck $1 into a vending machine and it didn't give you your thing. What happened?
I have no idea. What
This never happened to you?
Oh, I mean, it depends on the thing. Like if it's like
a soda, a Pepsi,
kick the machine, hit the button again or whatever.
Exactly. You pushed the button like 4 times and nothing's happening. And what do? You keep pushing the button because you've been trained, you've been conditioned your whole life that if I put money in and I push this button, a Pepsi will come out. And at the one time the Pepsi doesn't come out, you don't go, the machine must be broken. No, instead you spend 4 minutes pressing that button and kicking that machine, thinking that the Pepsi, eventually somehow that damn Pepsi is going to come out. Or even you hear this story all the time. They took out another dollar bill and I put another dollar bill in the machine and thought, okay, maybe this time it'll go through and I'll get my Pepsi. You hear this story all the time. Everyone has experience with something like this. And it's, even though in your head somewhere, you know, this is crazy, the machine is broken, it's not going to give you a Pepsi, but you've got years and years of conditioning of knowing that when I press the button, the Pepsi comes out. So I'm going to keep doing that. Eventually it'll work. Right. And it takes a very long time. Like it takes a shockingly long time, you know, given the evidence that's in front of you, for the person to finally realize I'm not getting a Pepsi out of this machine. It must be broken.
Jeez. All right. So speaking of taking dollars out of your wallet and sticking them into vending machines that just keep breaking your heart, let's talk about, every year, I really love, this is my favorite tradition of the Boxscore Geeks. Every year you head out to Vegas, you put some bets down. Thus far, I think you're up, not as much as we'd wanted to be, but you know, you're up.
I'm up. I'm not losing.
This year, I think are you still up this year? I forget. Do we have a final tally?
Well, it's always hard to say. You're looking at the numbers, but it looks like I'm up.
Okay, so that'll be coming up tomorrow.
I think there are several bets that you can forget about. For example, the Timberwolves over. That's never going to happen.
To clarify, you put 11. You put 11 over/under bets. You know, obviously we could go for all 30 NBA teams, but Vegas has some teams pegged correctly. So, for instance, you didn't go near Denver because Denver was about the right mark, and then you put
oddly enough, I didn't go near Atlanta either because they were about the right mark.
And then you had a 7 various winning the division bets that you also put down. And so tomorrow you're going to go over how you're doing on some, and there's some that are surefire. So actually, let's go with that. What's right now, Christmas spirit? What's your favorite surefire bet that you made at the beginning of the season that's looking in good shape now?
Surefire bet?
Like you and tomorr's article, you phrased it as book it, hang on to it, throw it out. So let's talk your favorite book it bet.
Ironically, there's two division bets that are both book it's, right? I mean, Toronto to win the Atlantic. Like there's just, I mean, it looks like Brooklyn's kind of improving now because they put Lopez on the bench, and so they're playing better players, but they're not going to catch up to Toronto. I mean, they're like what?
They're
12,
10 and a half games back.
10 and a half games behind, and there is no one else in the Atlantic that has any chance of catching up. Even if Kyle Lowry went down, this is pretty much a book it. Another one is Portland to win the Northwest because again, everyone else is just too far behind. Like I agree. From here on out, assuming Durant gets healthy again, the Thunder will be a great team, but they're not going to catch up on that like 8 or 9 game deficit they have. That's just, I mean, because people keep thinking like, oh yeah, but Toronto's going to be great going forward. Yeah, except Portland's not going to just start playing 500 ball. Like, I mean, they would have to play very bad in order for Toronto to make up the deficit. So those both are pretty much booked, and then another one to add onto that is the Charlotte Hornets under 44. That's as good as booked too. I mean they've won 10 games so far, so they'd have to play like 700 ball the rest of the way in order to catch up there. Those are all the bookets, and I think it's kind of ironic that two of the division winner bets are the ones that I'm already booking.
By the way, the one that you didn't mention, given how much you've talked about Chris Bosh, is I'm surprised you didn't mention the Miami under 44 because preseason you were
That's
just
actually a
very
little closer than you think. I mean, it still looks great, but I think it's gonna be kind of close. I mean, I put it in the book it column, but I'm a little worried that I'm acting too early on that.
Gotcha.
I mean, it still looks like a great bet, obviously. And for similar reasons, I think the one that worries me a little more is Brooklyn to be under 42 because Brooklyn's it feels like they're starting to figure out that Brook Lopez isn't that great an option right now. So every minute that he sits improves their chances of winning. I still think it's a good bet.
Plumlee is darn good. Yeah.
Yeah, Plumlee's good, and I still think it's a good bet, but I suspect this one we might start sweating that a little bit more. Sacramento over 30 is also looking really great. They're on a pace to win 36 games, so it's close but not that close.
And as you mentioned, some of that was because of like stupid injuries, like DeMarcus Cousins going. Yeah,
who gets viral meningitis? Come on. If he had sprained an ankle, fine, but viral meningitis is just crazy.
The worst, by the way, I recall, I always bring back to my Denver Nuggets, but back in the day when they were finally starting to click and then Nene went down with testicular cancer. And you were just like, oh, whatever. Because, he had years of knee injuries or whatever, and he gets testicular cancer. And you're just like, fine. Clearly, we're not meant to win.
Yeah.
All right. So
and then there's a couple of bets that are on the fence that I still really love. My favorite one is obviously Atlanta to win the Southeast. Right now, they are a half game back, and that pays 6-1. So that's a great one. I wish I had put more money on it. There's only.
And by the way, Atlanta
just percentage of the portfolio, but.
In general, they have our poster child, right? They have Kyle Korver, who, he's amazing.
Yeah, Kyle. I mean, so is this the year that Kyle Korver finally makes the All-Star game? I mean,
I doubt.
He still doesn't have a great points per game, but I mean, my God,
does he count as a guard or a forward in the East? Because Derrick Rose is going to get a spot. I guess Rondo is gone.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. The fact that Derrick Rose will make it in on name alone. Yeah,
but Derrick Rose.
Okay, well, hang on. So Atlanta. I mean, Carver was never making it in the voting. The question is whether the coaches are savvy enough to pick him, right? And I mean, it's a big question of whether the coaches are savvy enough to pick him. I kind of have my doubts. Instead, I think we're going to see, players who score more points per game but that don't deserve it. Like Joe Johnson is a shoo-in again, even though.
Jeez.
I mean, because he made it last year, mystifyingly ahead of Kyle Lowry, and he wasn't even that good last year. And this year, his numbers are a little better, and so I suspect that he's probably the only player on that Nets team that anyone considers a quote unquote star. So I'm sure he'll make it in. But anyway, to get back to your point, Kyle Lowry is amazing and always has been amazing.
Korver and Lowry, both of them, we love both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so by the way, Brian was excited about this for some reason. I guess we love the Spurs on this podcast. But I actually someone asked me on Quora, and I answered as to why the Spurs. By the way, if people because Patrick and I are both on Quora, if you like our stuff, upvote it, because if you don't, I'm debating if I want to keep on Quora, because I get a lot. I mean, it's not a dig against Quora, but it seems like the forum on Quora is people wanting pop culture or tech answers from from inside of Google or LinkedIn on the culture or whatever. And I get a lot of views on my sports answers there, but I get 5 votes. And it is some kind of weird pecking order system there. So if you like the stuff we do on Quora, vote it up. If you don't, that's fine. We'll just put it on the Boxscore Geeks. But yeah, if you read my answers on Quora about the Spurs and you don't vote them up, it doesn't help me at all. But with that said, the Spurs are one of these teams where for the first year, I think pre-show was listening to me talk. I said they've made like 58 games all 4 of the last years. I tempted fate there. You said they're hanging on because they've been playing horribly, but this is just a case of injury crushing them.
It's injury crushing them, and also bad luck because let's face it, they lost 2 triple overtime games in a row. Like, really? That's just crazy. I mean, some of it is injury, some of it is Pop being like, well, I don't care as long as I make the playoffs, I'm going to rest my guys. But really, I mean, the division winning bet for San Antonio is still in play, but I just don't think there's any way they can win 58 games. It's just too much ground to catch up. And it all really, the division winning bet, that depends on Kawhi Leonard getting healthy again. And it's kind of uncertain. His timetable for return is uncertain. And that's the big factor at play here is when will Kawhi Leonard return and will there be enough time for...
He has a history of, I want you healthy for the playoffs. So if the question
is... think about how long he let Patty Mills just sit and gestate before he brought him back, right?
So, I mean, I think that's the other problem is that even, let's say they get to 52 wins with a week left. If their debate is, I would like Tim Duncan, Kawhi Leonard, and whoever to be healthy, and we're going to be playing someone tough in the first round of the playoffs regardless, you might see him get sat. Anyway.
Or he'll just wait as long as possible to bring them out, right? I mean, he even basically looked at a reporter who asked about Patty Mills, and he says, well, Patty Mills looks fine to me, but I'm going to wait anyway.
By the way, that is the right mentality. Like, if you think about, we were talking a little pre-show, and we're not going to get into this. You made the best metaphor. We'll have to see if it comes up on a future show about normal jobs versus the NBA. And a normal job, they're like, Patrick, you look kind of sick. Take the day off. Don't get the office sick. Don't come in. The NBA, they're like, you look kind of sick. Come into work. We need you to play.
Yeah. Well, actually, we were talking about more not like health, but like sort of attitude too. Because it depends on your job, but there are a lot of jobs where you come into the office and you're like, man, I'm in a terrible mood today. I got to clear my schedule. I can't do my 2:00 meeting. I got to lock myself in a room, try and get some work alone done. I'm sure my boss will understand. You obviously can't do that if you're a teacher or a policeman or a fireman, but there's definitely leeway for lots of people to just say, hey, today is just a bad day for me. Hey, I need to take a sick day and just play golf. Cause there's I, for example, work in a job where there's no sick days. There's just personal days. And so if you decide you want to play golf, you just have to take one of your personal days, and that's fine. It counts against your personal days, and you get any X of them per year. But you can't do that when you play the NBA. You can't just wake up on a Monday feeling like you slept on the wrong side of the bed and then just tell your boss, yeah, I can't do today because I just feel awful. I don't really feel like passing the ball to Kobe today, so I'm just gonna take the day off. Okay. It's like,
okay. So by the way, I hate to cut you off because you said you had a hard stop at 7:30. I don't want to keep you late. So your call. We can head straight into shout outs, or you can say your last, you have some, it'll be out tomorrow, but you have a few, they're over, we lost on Philadelphia this year, but if you want to mention one of those, and then I say we go to shout outs, and that'll be this week's show.
Yeah. I mean, Philadelphia's actually gotten a little closer, but still looks terrible. I think the one that's gone over is Minnesota because Ricky Rubio just cannot get healthy in time to make up the difference. They're 5-24, so they would have to play, probably by the time Ruby gets back, they'd have to play above 500 ball the rest of the way in order for me to make this money. So Rubio's good, but he's not that good. He can't make up that difference. So
you
that
just
money
can't be happy in Minnesota, man.
I might as well just burn that ticket, man. I should know better than to bet on Minnesota. Never bet on Flip or George Karl.
Fair enough. All right. So that's our show, and we always end on a shout out. So I think you and Brian both have them. So I'll let you go first. Brian, just make sure you're not muted when you hop in for yours. And yeah, that'll be the show.
No, absolutely, Dre. Just another shout out for doing the show this year to you guys and all the readers and listeners. It was really fun, and we're going to keep going next year with this awesome NBA season. In fact, yeah, some of our top commenters, Andrew Sutton, Todd 2 Dodgson, you guys are right on the top of our last one. You guys are always there posting, and we love talking to you guys. So, yeah, everyone else who I missed, it was great to make these shows for you guys this year. And one more thing, Dre, is there may be some kind of a Josh Smith game tracker that we're going to come up with.
We didn't bring that up.
Well, so you may have set the number at 25, you think is going to be the line for that? We're good games for him. We'll have to flesh this out, but I think that's going to be fun too.
I'll put this on the show notes, but I commented on Twitter that I am retiring my Morey Ball shirt until Josh Smith has 25 good games. He's at 1 out of 3 so far. Until he has 25 good games or until he's off of the Rockets. So I'll put that in the comments. All right. So, Patrick, who do you got?
I got some year-end shout-outs. As always, I think Jonathan Weiler of the ESPN Watch is a great follow. I love his stuff. I love reading his stuff. He's just full of common sense and loves to call out ESPN on their stuff. Especially if you're into college basketball, he has a lot to say about the college basketball and not really in terms of the players on the field, but in terms of how the business works. And he's got some great insight into that stuff. Also a big shout out to Dave Barry, as always, for his stellar work in player analysis and basketball statistics. And Dave's a great follow on Twitter. He's always got like really interesting things to say. Just recently, he was talking about on ESPN, Isaiah Thomas was on there evaluating players, and Dave just tweeted out, hey, when we listen to Isaiah Thomas evaluating players, we should think back to when Isaiah Thomas was paid to evaluate players and how that worked out for the Knicks. And then another one, this is one that our readers probably are not very familiar with. There's a guy named Stephen McPherson who he's a beat writer, and he's a writer for A Wolf Among Wolves and also of I think he's A Wolf Among Wolves, and also what's the other one? He might also write for Canis Hoopus, and on Twitter he's at Steve Venturous, and he's also done some great pieces on Medium. He's just like an excellent writer. All of his stuff just really kind of hits home. I love reading his stuff, so I'll give a shout out to him as well.
Oh man, he's also done for Grantland, so he still likes us in spite of that. So there you go.
Yeah.
All right, and so I can't top those, right? So those were great shout outs. Of course, I echo those. I didn't come up with anything special for year end. I just did normal ones. So I usually like to thank one of the commenters on the show. So last week, Kevin made a comment on the show about the myth of Josh Smith just needing to be a smarter shot selector, and just come on, can we just get over it? He's bad at shooting. Just thank you so much for that. Kevin also mentioned something about coaching, and he said not entirely true. What I will say, Kevin, is you need to pick up Stumbling on Wins, because the coaching research I mentioned in that, he brings up Flip Saunders as a decent coach. And, we actually had some pre-show discussion about coaches, Patrick, about how even if you're really good at certain things, you can be bad at other things. So Flip Saunders, good at improving player production, bad at keeping stars around like Ben Wallace. But, you brought up Flip Saunders. Flip Saunders is actually one of the few coaches. So when I said it's really hard to be good at coaching, Flip Saunders is one of the few I wasn't actually talking about. And the final shout out I have is Snotty Drippin' on Twitter. I like to think of myself as a Kobe hater. I like to think of myself as getting some cred on Twitter for people thinking I don't like Kobe. Snotty actually made it to SB Nation. A fan got so incensed with some comments Snotty made about Kobe Bryant that he threatened to drive to Temecula. He actually took a picture. I think I'm saying that name right. If I'm not, apologies. So you win. You got a story written about how you were the best Kobe hater on the web. I can't top that. Just congrats. So anyway, that is our show. We did this show live, and so we're going to try and do that again next week. We got a few people watching. We'll try and tweet it out ahead of time so you actually have advance notice. And with that, we'll see you next week.